I'm calling 911 right now. Her voice cuts through the evening air. Phone already at her ear. I'm standing 20 feet away in my open garage, surrounded by friends and their kids eating pizza, watching this woman I barely know report me as a drug dealer. There's a criminal operation happening at 42 Oak Street, she says, into the phone, her voice shaking with conviction. Multiple suspects. Sophisticated equipment. I can see everything from here. I step toward the driveway. Hands visible. Completely confused. Ma'am, this is just a barbecue. These are my consulting clients and their families. She doesn't even look at me. Just keeps talking to the dispatcher. He's approaching me now. Send units immediately. I've been documenting this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks I've been running a legitimate security consulting business from this garage for 6 months. And she thinks I'm running a drug operation. The distant wail of sirens starts up somewhere across town, getting louder. My friend Derek, who's been grilling burgers in the driveway, sets down his spatula and sighs. Well, this is going to be interesting. I don't understand what he means until I see his badge on his belt. That's when I realize every single person at my suspicious garage party is either a cop or married to one. I never thought running a security consulting business from my garage would put me on someone's surveillance list. I'm Ryan Mitchell. And what started as an innovative business setup turned into the most stressful 3 weeks of my life before exploding into the most ironic emergency response situation imaginable. Converting my garage had taken 6 months of careful planning and municipal permits. What was once a cluttered storage space became a hybrid office and demonstration area that perfectly served my security consulting needs in suburban Phoenix. Arizona. 3 monitors lined the back wall displaying security feeds and threat analysis programs, while a professional meeting table commanded the center space. The mini fridge, sound system, and professional lighting created an atmosphere that disarmed corporate paranoia and encouraged honest conversations about vulnerabilities. My open garage policy during business hours provided transparency that executives valued. They could see there were no hidden recording devices, just straightforward consulting conducted, where anyone could witness the professionalism. That visibility from the street initially seemed like a marketing bonus, demonstrating responsible community membership through legitimate business operations conducted in full public view. The openness paradoxically made clients feel secure about sharing sensitive information in an industry built on secrets. The casual yet professional environment allowed hands-on equipment demonstrations that made abstract security concepts tangible through physical scenarios that corporate boardrooms couldn't replicate. What I didn't know was that my transparency was being interpreted very differently by someone watching from across the street. Melissa Crawford made it her business to witness everything. As HOA president and successful real estate agent, she maintained daily walking routes past my house, morning and evening, like clockwork. Her professional background trained her to notice details that might impact property values or community standards. She'd complimented my setup during our brief early conversations, noting that successful home businesses enhanced neighborhood appeal to professionals seeking work-from-home flexibility. I'd appreciated the encouragement, thinking I had community support for my venture. But Melissa's curiosity evolved into something more systematic over recent weeks. Her walks became strategically timed to coincide with my appointment schedule. I kept predictable hours, meetings blocked in 2-hour windows that Melissa had apparently memorized. She'd appear whenever client sessions were scheduled. Notepad, ready for documentation? Pausing near my property with practiced attention. Most other neighbors missed the pattern entirely since my business hours coincided with their work schedules. The midweek afternoon meetings and early evening sessions happened when the street was largely empty, with only Melissa's retirement flexibility, putting her in position to notice the consistent activity levels around my property. The pattern that triggered Melissa's suspicions was exactly what made my business successful. Multiple men arrived throughout each week for precisely scheduled meetings, conducting business with professional efficiency before departing with the same serious demeanor they'd maintained throughout. Each client received security documentation, vulnerability reports, and compliance checklists in official folders that required careful review and signature. From Melissa's street-level perspective, these professional documents appeared concerning when viewed through unfamiliar eyes. The folders changed hands with formal precision, and payment processing involved detailed paperwork that clients scrutinized carefully before approving. The sophisticated equipment surrounding these transactions, communication devices, surveillance monitors, threat assessment computers created an atmosphere that could be interpreted as something far more sinister than corporate security consulting. Tuesday morning in late January 2025 brought Melissa's most detailed observation session yet. She positioned herself across the street with clear sight lines as Eric arrived for our weekly assessment review. I didn't notice her watching as we examined security camera footage on the monitors. When Eric signed his updated service agreement and collected his assessment folder, Melissa documented everything with her phone camera. The equipment demonstration that followed, testing new encryption protocols on communication devices, looked like something entirely different when viewed from her distant vantage point. Wednesday evening presented an even more concerning scene from Melissa's perspective. Jennifer arrived with her monthly compliance checklist requiring documentation updates that involved reviewing thick binders and signing multiple forms. As Jennifer examined each document carefully before approving updates, Melissa observed what appeared to be sophisticated operational planning conducted with formal procedures. By Thursday, Melissa had documented enough evidence to convince herself that whatever was happening in my garage went far beyond normal business consulting. The consistent patterns, elaborate documentation, sophisticated equipment, and serious demeanor of all participants suggested something requiring immediate investigation. The timing of Melissa's attention had become almost supernatural in its accuracy. My clients appreciated the consistency of our scheduling: same days, same time blocks, same professional efficiency that allowed them to plan security assessments around busy executive calendars. What I viewed as excellent customer service through reliable scheduling, Melissa interpreted as suspicious operational timing that suggested coordinated activities requiring precise synchronization among multiple participants. Melissa's real estate background made her especially sensitive to activities that might impact neighborhood character or property values. Home-based businesses could enhance community appeal when conducted professionally, but they could also create problems if operations raised questions among neighbors or authorities. Her HOA presidency required vigilance about activities that might generate complaints, making her natural tendency toward watchfulness a professional necessity rather than simple curiosity. The sophisticated equipment visible through my open garage door presented the most concerning element from Melissa's analysis. Security consulting required legitimate technology for demonstrations and assessments, but the same equipment could serve entirely different purposes in wrong hands. Communication devices, surveillance monitors, and threat assessment computers formed an arsenal that suggested capabilities far beyond typical business consulting, especially when combined with formal documentation procedures and consistent participant behavior patterns. Melissa's growing conviction that something required investigation was strengthened by the contrast between my operation and typical home businesses in the neighborhood. Most residents who worked from home conducted quiet activities, writing, accounting, phone consultations that generated minimal visible activity or equipment requirements. My garage setup represented something entirely different in scale. Sophistication. An operational complexity that didn't match standard suburban business patterns she'd observed during years of real estate work throughout Phoenix's residential neighborhoods. My complete unawareness of Melissa's surveillance meant I continued conducting business with the same transparency that had always served my clients well. The open garage door policy, consistent scheduling, and visible equipment demonstrations were marketing advantages that built trust with corporate executives concerned about confidentiality, but they were creating exactly the opposite impression on someone watching from the wrong perspective. Someone who decided that what she was witnessing couldn't possibly be legitimate business consulting conducted in broad daylight. 3 weeks of watching had turned into an obsession I knew nothing about. While I continued my morning routine of checking emails and preparing for client meetings, Melissa had developed her own routine that revolved entirely around my schedule. Her 6 o'clock morning walks weren't casual neighborhood strolls anymore. They were systematic intelligence-gathering missions designed to document every detail of what she was convinced had become a criminal operation hiding in plain sight. Melissa's morning surveillance had evolved into precise documentation and analysis. She carried a small notebook during these early walks, recording license plate numbers of vehicles that appeared regularly in my driveway. The same cars returned on predictable schedules, which in Melissa's mind confirmed her growing suspicion that something organized was taking place. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd identified a core group of regular visitors. But this most recent week had provided what she considered the clearest evidence yet of activities that didn't match typical residential business patterns. Tuesday morning at exactly 9:15. Eric arrived in his black pickup truck for what I knew was our weekly security assessment review. From Melissa's position across the street, she documented his arrival and the serious discussion that followed. What Melissa observed was Eric examining thick documentation while reviewing operational plans displayed on my computer monitors. His professional bearing made every interaction look like strategic coordination rather than corporate consulting. When Eric signed multiple forms and collected updated reports, Melissa captured photos of what appeared to be planning sessions for activities she couldn't identify, but found deeply concerning given the systematic nature of our interactions. Wednesday evening brought Jennifer's compliance review session, which provided even more concerning evidence from Melissa's perspective. The systematic examination of detailed protocols looked like operational briefings when viewed through Melissa's increasingly suspicious interpretive lens. She watched from her kitchen window as Jennifer reviewed procedural manuals and compliance checklists with intense concentration that made her an excellent security officer, but looked like something entirely different to someone expecting criminal activities. The evidence was accumulating in ways that strengthened Melissa's conviction with each observation session. Digital payment confirmations processed on computer screens suggested regular financial transactions for services Melissa couldn't identify. The garage workspace contained sophisticated communication equipment, radios, encrypted devices, technology that appeared far more advanced than typical business consulting would require. Documentation was constant and detailed, with folders changing hands and charts being reviewed with concentration that suggested serious coordination efforts requiring systematic planning and execution. Melissa's interpretation of these observations was logical from her limited perspective, but completely wrong in reality. What she was witnessing appeared to be some kind of coordinated enterprise with advanced communication systems and professional organization. The open garage door wasn't transparency, it was confidence from people who believed themselves beyond scrutiny. operating with sophisticated equipment and formal procedures that suggested activities requiring operational security. Professional consultation became Melissa's next step in building a case. She called her friend Linda, a former prosecutor who'd handled numerous cases during her career. Describing the situation in terms that painted a concerning picture, Linda's response validated Melissa's concerns. If suspicious activity was that obvious and conducted so openly, the participants were either extremely naive or very confident in their protection from scrutiny. Either scenario presented potential concerns for community standards. Linda advised Melissa to document everything thoroughly because authorities would need comprehensive evidence to investigate what sounded like activities that might exceed normal residential business parameters. The misunderstanding deepened significantly when I installed additional security cameras around my garage the following week. The new surveillance equipment was installed at my client's request as part of a comprehensive security assessment demonstration. But from Melissa's perspective, the cameras represented protection measures for criminal activities. The timing seemed particularly suspicious, occurring just as Melissa had begun her systematic documentation of my garage operations. My equipment upgrades that same week, better computers, and more professional communication devices convinced Melissa that whatever enterprise was taking place was expanding its capabilities and sophistication beyond anything she'd initially suspected. Community concern became Melissa's next strategy. She approached Mrs. Anderson, whose kitchen window provided direct sight lines into my garage workspace, sharing observations about the constant activity and sophisticated equipment visible through the open door. Mrs. Anderson confirmed that she could see right into the garage from her kitchen and had noticed the regular pattern of visitors conducting what appeared to be business transactions involving detailed documentation and systematic procedures. Mr. Chen listened politely when Melissa described the sophisticated equipment and professional organization of activities happening in my garage. His background in corporate management made him naturally observant about business operations, though he remained diplomatically non-committal about drawing conclusions. He acknowledged that the combination of technology and systematic procedures seemed intensive for residential business use, but stopped short of suggesting anything improper was necessarily taking place. Building awareness became a neighborhood effort as Melissa shared her documentation with trusted residents who could provide additional observations. The pattern of evidence was too consistent and organized to ignore, with multiple witnesses confirming systematic activities that raised questions. Melissa's role as HOA president made her responsible for monitoring neighborhood compliance, while her real estate background provided experience in identifying activities that might create complications for community standards or property values. Melissa began wondering privately whether proper permits were in place for such intensive business operations conducted from a residential garage. Though she had no legal training to assess actual requirements, the zoning regulations for home-based businesses were complex, and Melissa wasn't certain what activities required special authorization. Her concerns remained speculative rather than based on definitive knowledge of violations. But the scale and sophistication seemed beyond typical home office parameters. The confidence building in Melissa's mind was reinforced by every observation session and community conversation. The open garage door represented operational boldness rather than business transparency, suggesting that whoever was running these systematic activities felt secure about their authorization or protection. This level of openness suggested either proper permits that Melissa couldn't identify or connections that made official scrutiny unlikely, though she couldn't determine which scenario was more concerning for neighborhood interests. Melissa's conviction was reaching the point where she believed she had comprehensive evidence requiring official inquiry. The documentation was thorough. The community concerns were growing, and the potential implications for neighborhood standards were becoming clearer with each passing week. What she didn't understand was that her systematic surveillance had created a completely false narrative about legitimate business activities conducted by professionals who were actually authorized to handle exactly the types of security and coordination activities Melissa found so concerning. The garage door was open because I had nothing to hide, but that openness was creating exactly the wrong impression on someone who'd already decided that criminal activity was the only explanation for the sophisticated and systematic operations she was witnessing. Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock brought the confrontation that would change everything, though neither of us realized it at the time. I was expecting Eric for our routine weekly security assessment update, the same meeting we'd conducted for months without incident. What I didn't know was that Melissa had positioned herself strategically across the street, phone ready and notepad in hand, prepared to document what she was increasingly convinced was definitive evidence of criminal activity happening in broad daylight. Eric arrived precisely on schedule, his black pickup pulling into my driveway with the punctuality that made him an excellent analyst and reliable consulting client. From Melissa's vantage point on the sidewalk, she had clear view directly into my garage workspace. What Melissa observed was Eric and me engaging in serious discussion while I handed him updated security assessment folders and he reviewed digital payment confirmations on my computer system. The transaction was completely visible from the street, which had always been my intention as a transparency measure. Eric examined vulnerability reports, signed updated service agreements, and approved payment authorizations with methodical attention to detail. From Melissa's street-level position, the serious demeanor and systematic documentation procedures suggested something that might exceed normal consulting work. When Eric collected his folders and departed with professional efficiency, Melissa believed she documented evidence of activities warranting closer investigation through official channels rather than continued passive observation. The polite inquiry approach became Melissa's strategy for gathering additional information while testing boundaries of her HOA authority. She crossed the street and approached my open garage with diplomatic demeanor, though her questioning carried undertones of official inquiry. "Ryan, busy evening?" she asked, with calculated casualness. "I've noticed quite a bit of business activity in your garage lately. As HOA president, I need to ensure residential compliance with community standards. The level of equipment and regular client traffic raises questions about whether proper permits are in place." My response was friendly, but I sensed that Melissa's inquiry represented more than casual interest. "Just client meetings for security consulting." Melissa, corporate clients need regular assessments and updates on their security protocols. The garage setup works perfectly for equipment demonstrations. That's certainly sophisticated equipment for typical consulting work, she observed, gesturing toward the communication devices and computer systems. The systematic nature of these meetings suggests something beyond standard business consulting. "I'm wondering whether zoning approvals are in place for this level of commercial activity. Corporate security requires advanced technology for demonstrating vulnerabilities and testing protective measures," I explained. Though I could see Melissa wasn't entirely convinced. The systematic approach is necessary for thorough assessment. "Ryan, having this level of visible activity raises concerns," she stated with increasing directness. "Some neighbors have mentioned their unease about the constant traffic and sophisticated equipment. As HOA president, I have responsibility to ensure nothing inappropriate is happening that could impact property values or community safety." My confusion was genuine as I tried to understand what Melissa found concerning about legitimate business. "Melissa, it's entirely legitimate consulting work. You can see everything that happens here. There's nothing hidden, nothing secretive. I'm happy to provide references from corporate clients. Escalating surveillance became Melissa's strategy over the following days as she positioned herself across the street with optimal sight lines. She documented everything through photos with her phone camera, creating what she believed was comprehensive evidence. The point of no return arrived when Melissa called the police dispatcher to inquire about procedures for reporting suspected activities that might violate residential zoning or involve unauthorized commercial operations. When the dispatcher explained that if she could see active violations, she should call 911 immediately. Melissa realized she had reached the threshold where her documentation demanded action. Friday morning brought the invitation that would trigger everything. The email I sent to clients was straightforward. Garage, hangout, Friday, 7 p.m. Bring families. Casual evening. What I intended as relaxed social gathering would become the final piece of evidence that convinced Melissa to escalate. Melissa received the party information through Mrs. Anderson, who'd been forwarded the neighborhood notification. The subject line, "Garage Party Friday Night," immediately caught her attention, seeming to confirm her suspicions. From her perspective, the timing appeared deliberate. After weeks of systematic activities, this party might represent something more significant than casual socializing. The open invitation to bring families suggested planning designed to avoid suspicion. Pre-party preparation began Friday afternoon as I arranged tables and chairs throughout the workspace, creating a social environment. The sound system was repositioned for background music, while coolers were added for beverages. The garage door remained wide open, providing complete visibility. Melissa observed my setup from across the street, documenting what appeared to her as elaborate preparation for activities disguised as party planning. The technical equipment remained visible throughout the workspace, suggesting business elements would continue alongside social activities. The party arrivals began promptly at 7 o'clock as my clients and their families gathered. Melissa positioned herself with camera access. Eric arrived with his wife and children, followed by Jennifer with her boyfriend. Then Derek with his family. From Melissa's limited perspective, the arrivals appeared coordinated and purposeful rather than casual party guests. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to go, suggesting this might be more organized than typical neighborhood socializing. What Melissa observed through my open garage raised questions. Computer screens displayed information that could have been anything from party music playlists to business presentations. People gathered around tables examining materials that might have been party games or professional documents. The transaction evidence that Melissa observed included digital payment systems visible on computer screens. Documents were being passed around among adult participants, while equipment demonstrations continued despite the party atmosphere. Family presence came as Melissa observed children playing throughout the garage, while adults conducted conversations that appeared serious. The integration of family entertainment with what looked like focused discussion suggested sophisticated planning. The trigger moment arrived at 7:30 when I stepped outside to take a phone call about catering confirmation. Melissa positioned herself to overhear conversation fragments. What she heard were snippets like, "Everything ready and everyone is here," which could be interpreted as operational coordination rather than simple pizza delivery confirmation. Melissa's growing conviction was that something significant might be happening with the phone call representing final coordination. The combination of systematic preparation, professional equipment, family presence, and apparent coordination suggested she was witnessing the culmination of weeks of planning. The decision point arrived as Melissa realized her community responsibilities might demand action. She called 911 with growing conviction that she was reporting legitimate concerns requiring emergency response. I need to report suspicious activity at 42 Oak Street, she told the dispatcher with mounting urgency. There's a garage party, but it looks like business activity, sophisticated equipment, people conducting meetings. I think something significant might be happening that needs investigation. The dispatcher's response validated Melissa's decision units, responding to reported suspicious activity. Stay clear of the area. Watching the garage party from across the street, Melissa was convinced she'd fulfilled her civic duty by reporting activities that appeared to exceed normal neighborhood standards. What she didn't understand was that she had just called emergency services to investigate a garage party where off-duty police officers were socializing with their families, creating the most ironic law enforcement response imaginable. The emergency dispatch system classified Melissa's report as possible illegal activity with visible evidence, automatically triggering multiple unit response protocols that would bring 3 patrol cars racing toward Oak Street within minutes. What started as one neighbor's suspicious observations was now mobilizing law enforcement machinery designed to investigate serious criminal activity in residential neighborhoods. Melissa positioned herself at the perfect witness spot for what she expected would be dramatic intervention, finally validating weeks of community protection efforts. Her evidence folder contained comprehensive documentation photos, timeline observations, detailed notes about suspicious activities. Inside my garage, the party continued with relaxed atmosphere of normal family socializing. Completely unaware that emergency response units were approaching with lights and sirens, kids played throughout the workspace, fascinated by security gadgets. While adults shared work stories, Eric was telling everyone about his division's recent success, busting an actual garage-based operation downtown. While Jennifer shared K-9 unit stories, and Derek contributed traffic enforcement anecdotes. The professional instincts that made these officers excellent at their jobs kicked in as distant sirens became audible. Off-duty cops developed finely tuned ears for emergency response patterns, able to identify different types of calls based on siren combinations. The approaching sounds triggered automatic attention from people trained to recognize when serious law enforcement activity was developing nearby. Though none initially connected the emergency response to their own casual garage gathering, sounds like multiple units heading this way, Eric observed with professional interest, while Derek checked his phone wondering if he'd missed emergency notifications requiring off-duty assistance. Jennifer confirmed the emergency response was approaching their immediate area with sound patterns indicating at least 3 units responding to what appeared to be significant criminal activity in their neighborhood. Their wives and families looked puzzled by the men's ability to identify specific types of law enforcement responses based solely on emergency vehicle sounds. Asking how they could possibly know so much about police operations, the explanation would have to wait. However, as the emergency vehicles were clearly getting closer and the off-duty officers were beginning to realize that whatever was happening was definitely coming to their location, despite her conviction about the necessity of official intervention, Melissa felt a slight tremor of uncertainty as emergency vehicles approached with full lights and sirens. The magnitude of law enforcement response was more dramatic than she'd anticipated. The professional equipment and systematic procedures that had seemed so suspicious might have legitimate explanations she hadn't considered, though her documented evidence suggested activities warranting official investigation. The emergency vehicle's arrival would test Melissa's systematic surveillance against the reality of off-duty law enforcement officers who had no idea their casual socializing had been interpreted as evidence of organized crime. 3 patrol cars turned onto Oak Street with full emergency lighting. Their destination, clearly my house, Where Melissa waited to direct official attention toward the garage party, she remained convinced represented criminal activity inside the garage. Law enforcement professionals were beginning to recognize that the emergency response was definitely coming to their immediate location. That's definitely coming here. Jennifer voiced what was becoming obvious to everyone with police experience, while Eric added that someone had apparently called emergency response on what was supposed to be casual gathering among friends. The dawning realization spread through the group as they looked at each other. Then, at their party setup, understanding that emergency response units were approaching to investigate them. The collision between speculation and reality was becoming inevitable as emergency vehicles approached to investigate activities that existed in two completely different contexts depending on perspective and interpretation. Melissa's weeks of surveillance had created a narrative about criminal activity that would be tested against off-duty police officers enjoying legitimate social gathering with their families. Melissa steeled herself to provide comprehensive briefing to responding officers about the criminal enterprise she believed threatened community safety. While inside the garage, experienced law enforcement professionals were realizing they were about to be investigated for activities they recognized as exactly the types of operations they spent their careers fighting. The approaching perfect storm represented the moment when systematic surveillance based on misinterpretation would meet the reality of legitimate activities conducted by people whose professional expertise should have been obvious. The most ironic emergency response situation any of them had ever encountered was about to unfold as real police officers realized they were about to be investigated for the exact types of criminal activities they spent their professional careers fighting. The first contact at my garage unfolded as Melissa stepped forward to meet Lead Officer Williams, though her confidence carried uncertainty that hadn't been there during weeks of surveillance. "Officer, I'm the one who reported the concerning activity here," she said with serious demeanor of an HOA president fulfilling community duty. "I've been observing for several weeks, and the activities don't look like normal home business." Despite her determined tone, Melissa felt her chest tighten, part of her hoping she'd interpreted everything correctly, while another part feared there might be legitimate explanations she hadn't considered. Melissa presented her documentation folder containing photos taken from across the street, timeline notes, and observations that had convinced her of suspicious activity. Williams flipped through several images showing my open garage, systematic meetings, and equipment. The documentation was thorough enough for him to understand why she was concerned, though not definitive enough to conclude anything criminal was actually occurring without direct investigation. "This does warrant checking out, ma'am," Williams acknowledged professionally, validating Melissa's decision to contact authorities while maintaining appropriate skepticism about conclusions drawn from distant observation. The garage approach began as officers advanced toward my open workspace with tactical awareness appropriate for investigating reported suspicious activity inside the garage. Off-duty law enforcement officers had been expecting this moment, since recognizing the emergency response pattern when flashing lights reflected off the garage walls. Eric simply sighed quietly. "Yep, they're coming for us." Nobody panicked. They just looked at each other with resigned familiarity, like people accustomed to law enforcement who'd never expected to be targets while grilling and watching kids play. The children continued their innocent interaction with security equipment throughout the garage workspace, completely unaware that what they assumed was routine neighborhood activity was actually official investigation. Officer Williams announced official business according to standard procedure. "Police, we need to speak with the homeowner about reported concerns." He called toward my garage. I stepped forward with confused but cooperative demeanor. prepared to provide whatever assistance might be required. Though uncertain about why law enforcement was responding to casual social gathering, the moment of recognition arrived as Williams gained clear sightlines into my open workspace. Immediately identifying Eric near the equipment table with relaxed confidence, completely inappropriate for someone involved in criminal activity. When Williams saw Eric, he stopped immediately. "Detective Martinez, what are you doing here?" Eric raised his soda can like an explanation. "Party. Kids. Pizza." The entire group of off-duty officers stepped toward the garage entrance, revealing faces that the Phoenix Police Department knew as colleagues rather than criminal suspects. The revelation unfolded with elegant simplicity that required no additional explanation. Officer Williams recognized Sergeant Thompson, Officer Chen, and other familiar faces from law enforcement community enjoying legitimate family gathering. The sophisticated equipment was revealed as standard security demonstration gear used for corporate consulting and officer training, while systematic documentation involved professional reports shared among colleagues working in related security fields. Williams turned back toward Melissa, his tone remaining polite but carrying obvious confusion. "Ma'am, the people in that garage are all officers. This is completely legitimate." Melissa looked through the emergency vehicle lighting and saw two children sitting on the garage floor playing with their father's radio equipment. That single moment shattered the investigative narrative she'd constructed over weeks of systematic surveillance. The reality check continued as apparent evidence of criminal coordination was recontextualized within normal professional development activities. Digital payment processing represented standard consulting fee transactions, while organized meetings reflected legitimate business practices. Melissa's documentation crumbled as the context became clear, revealing how distant observation and predetermined assumptions had created false narrative about activities that were transparent, precisely because they involved legitimate professionals with nothing to hide. Officer Johnson addressed Melissa directly, with professional courtesy. "Ma'am, these are law enforcement officers conducting family social gathering. The equipment you documented is standard security consulting gear, and the systematic procedures reflect professional business practices." The understanding that Melissa's mistake was visible to everyone created immediate shift in neighborhood opinion as residents processed implications of false emergency reporting against law enforcement professionals. Professional consultation was minimal as Detective Martinez briefly shared context. 15 years narcotics work? I've raided actual garage operations. This is family hangout. Jennifer added simply that Melissa had observed police work equipment and assumed criminal applications, though the explanation was unnecessary given the obvious family atmosphere. Officer Williams inquired about Melissa's reporting pattern with professional curiosity. "How many times have you called about garage operations?" he asked directly. Melissa's response was defensive and fragmented. "I protect this neighborhood. Someone has to watch for." Her inability to articulate coherent justification revealed fundamental weakness of surveillance based on assumptions. Public consequences arrived as Williams completed official documentation in full view of neighborhood residents. The citation for false emergency report was processed efficiently and professionally. Melissa's protest was immediate and emotional. "This will ruin everything. I was protecting, you don't understand." The damage was already visible as neighbors observed her receiving official citation for false reporting. The shift in community perception was immediate as residents processed that Melissa had called emergency response on police officers enjoying social gathering. Mr. Chen observed quietly that they were just having pizza with their families, while other neighbors began questioning Melissa's judgment and surveillance methods. Professional closure proceeded efficiently as officers completed investigation without arrests. Eric briefly apologized to me for the interruption, while I confirmed consulting work would continue without disruption. Officer Williams provided final guidance about accurate assessment before emergency reporting, emphasizing resource deployment considerations for future community safety concerns. Melissa stood isolated on the street as emergency vehicles departed, her systematic surveillance efforts having culminated in public citation rather than criminal arrests that would have validated weeks of community protection activities. The neighbors who had gathered to witness expected drug bust instead observed dramatic demonstration of how predetermined assumptions about suspicious activities could create false narratives. The reputation collapse was complete and public as Melissa realized that every resident who had supported her community protection efforts had now witnessed her false emergency report against law enforcement officers. The open garage door that had provided transparency for my business operations had also ensured complete neighborhood visibility of her citation for misuse of police resources. Her weeks of documentation and systematic observation had been reduced to official record of false reporting. While the sophisticated criminal enterprise she'd believed threatened community safety was revealed as family gathering among security consultants. The garage door remained open as officers departed, providing continued visibility for neighborhood observation of legitimate activities that had been misinterpreted through surveillance conducted from incorrect assumptions. The immediate aftermath unfolded with surreal normalcy as officers cleared the scene and emergency vehicles departed, leaving my workspace exactly as it had been before. Melissa's call transformed family gathering into official investigation. Pizza's getting cold, I announced with forced cheerfulness, attempting to restore party atmosphere while neighbors lingered on sidewalks, processing what they'd witnessed. Melissa stood alone on the street corner, isolated and visibly shaken, while emergency lights faded and normal neighborhood evening resumed around her public embarrassment. The normal family evening continued in my open garage, as children resumed playing with security demonstration equipment, and adults returned to casual conversation. Eric helped kids understand radio communication protocols, while Jennifer demonstrated training techniques. Community processing began the next morning as neighborhood buzz focused entirely on Melissa's false emergency report. Mrs. Anderson expressed bewildered amazement during her morning walk. Could see right through that garage the whole time. Just normal people having family time. Mr. Chen shared similar sentiments about the officer's kindness toward children, noting how patient they'd been with curious kids asking questions about police work. The reputation impact was immediate and devastating as Melissa's credibility as community protector was completely destroyed by public demonstration of surveillance based on false assumptions. Business consequences arrived swiftly as Melissa faced $500 fine for false emergency reporting, while HOA board members called emergency meeting to address liability exposure. Melissa, your garage raid call exposed our entire organization to potential lawsuit. Board members explained with obvious frustration. You called emergency response on security consultants' legitimate business operations. The forced resignation was inevitable, given the level of misjudgment demonstrated through systematic surveillance that had culminated in false criminal accusations against law enforcement professionals. Personal reckoning began as Melissa reviewed her weeks of surveillance photos, finally understanding how normal everything had actually been when viewed without predetermined assumptions. I saw criminal operations where none existed. She admitted privately. Everything was open. Nothing hidden. and I destroyed neighborhood relationships over completely wrong assumptions about legitimate business activities. My response demonstrated remarkable grace as I continued business operations with newfound police endorsement from colleagues who appreciated my consulting work. I invited Melissa for coffee conversation, explaining that I didn't hold grudges against neighbors who had misunderstood legitimate activities. This garage setup is security consulting and officer training. I explained patiently, showing equipment and procedures that had appeared suspicious only when viewed through incorrect interpretive framework. Melissa's apology was genuine. Your garage activities look suspicious to me, but I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions. Community healing progressed naturally as new HOA leadership focused on supporting local business rather than enforcement-based community protection. Monthly garage meetings became regular community gatherings in my workspace where residents could observe security consulting operations. Off-duty officers became beloved neighbors whose regular garage visits provided actual community protection through professional expertise and visible law enforcement presence that deterred criminal activity through legitimate means. Melissa's lesson involved accepting new role as community garden coordinator position that emphasized nurturing growth rather than enforcement and surveillance activities. Open garage doesn't equal criminal activity. She learned through experience. Communication prevents assumptions, and garage parties actually bring community together. Her growth involved asking questions instead of making surveillance-based conclusions about activities that appeared suspicious only when viewed without proper context. The resolution was complete 6 months later as my business thrived with police referrals and enhanced reputation for transparency, while Melissa advocated for communication over suspicion in all community interactions. The neighborhood had become stronger through understanding that garage visibility represented legitimate business transparency rather than criminal enterprise. With children learning safety from officers in the same workspace that had once seemed threatening but was actually contributing to authentic community safety. The garage door remained open as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my workspace. The same equipment that had once been documented as evidence of criminal enterprise sat ready for Monday's client consultations, while the same systematic scheduling that had seemed suspicious would continue serving corporate executives who valued my reliability and professionalism. Melissa had learned that surveillance without communication breeds suspicion, that confidence in your assumptions doesn't make them accurate, and that sometimes the most transparent operations are the most legitimate ones. The garage door stayed open not as evidence of criminal arrogance, but as proof that legitimate business had nothing to hide. And sometimes, it takes a very public garage raid to make that truth obvious to everyone involved.